All right, let's dive into this. Misconduct investigations. Looks like you've sent over a ton of materials. Some pretty serious stuff, huh? But you know what? It's not always like those TV shows where it's all about catching the bad guy. It's like way more than that.
Yeah, it's really about protecting everyone, right?
Exactly. And actually, it even helps companies learn and grow.
That's so true. What really fascinates me about these guidelines is how much they emphasize building trust. Like real fairness, no matter what's going on.
Right, right. Okay, so let's unpack all this, starting with the very first step. Prepping for an investigation. Makes me think of a detective getting ready for a big case, you know?
Yeah, I see that.
Like they wouldn't just burst into a crime scene without the right stuff, would they?
No way. And in this case, your tools are the company's policies and procedures.
Makes sense.
You absolutely have to know them inside and out before you even think about doing anything, because that sets the stage for a really fair investigation, one that's, legally sound. Remember that case a while back? That company got slammed with a lawsuit because, well, their investigation just didn't follow their own rules.
Oof. Yeah, I do remember that. A good reminder to do your homework, huh? It's like putting on your legal armor before you head into battle.
Uh-huh. Good one.
And sometimes you need a whole team, right? Especially if things are really complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Depending on what's going on, you might need HR, legal, maybe even outside experts. And of course, right from the start, confidentiality is key.
Totally. Everyone has to be on the same page about that. But what happens when you need to talk to a bunch of people, but they all work together? Like, how do you stop the rumors?
Ooh, that's tricky. You have to be super strategic, like how you schedule things, how you talk to people, even where you have them meet.
Wow, something to think about. Okay, moving on to step 2, which is figuring out the scope and objectives. It's like a mission statement for the whole investigation, right?
Exactly. It's all about answering those crucial questions. What are we actually looking at here? What could happen if this keeps going unchecked?
Makes sense.
And what needs to be done right away? Do we need to suspend someone, secure evidence, maybe even call the police?
Right, depending on how serious things are. And this step stops the investigation from going off on, like, a wild goose chase, right?
Totally. It keeps everyone focused, laser focused on the real issue.
Gotcha. So then step 3 is when things really start happening. Those first interviews, I always picture this dark room, just one lamp on the desk.
Yeah.
You're sitting down with someone, getting their side of the story. It's like something out of a movie.
Well, it might not always be that dramatic, but those first interviews, they're super important. You have to be really careful, especially with the person who filed the complaint. Make them feel safe and comfortable.
Totally. You don't want anyone feeling like they're being grilled.
Right, and you want them to be open, to really share what happened. Now, sometimes those stories completely clash.
Oh, I bet. That must be tough to sort out.
It is. You have to really analyze each statement. Look for those little things that don't add up. Sometimes one tiny detail can be the key to unlocking the whole thing.
Like a puzzle, huh?
Exactly, where every piece is a different part of the story. And you might have to look at it from all these different angles, even be ready to change your mind as you learn more.
That makes sense. And it really shows how important it is to ask those open-ended questions, right? You don't want to lead the witness or, influence their memory.
Absolutely. They have to be able to tell their story in their own way without feeling pressured to say a specific thing. It's about creating that safe space.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about the person who's been, accused? Talking to them must be a whole other thing.
It is.
Yeah.
But it's super important to remember that everyone deserves fairness and respect, no matter what.
Right.
It's not about judging or deciding before we have all the facts. It's about gathering information to truly understand what happened and then, make a decision based on that.
Yeah, it's like walking this tightrope
Total.
between getting the info you need and making sure it's fair for everyone. And I bet documentation plays a huge part in all this, right? Having a clear record of everything that was said and done.
Yeah, documentation is huge. Think of it as a timeline of the whole investigation. Every single interview, every piece of evidence, every decision, it all needs to be documented carefully to make sure it's all transparent and accountable.
So it's not just about writing a report and, sticking it in a drawer.
Not at all. It's more about building a really complete and reliable account of the whole thing, just in case those notes are needed later, maybe for legal reasons or something. Yeah, it's like building a case brick by brick.
And sometimes, I bet those bricks don't fit as neatly as you'd hope. What happens when you run into, conflicting stories, missing info, or evidence that just takes you in a whole different direction.
That's when the real detective work comes in. You got to be flexible, ready to rethink everything, and just follow the evidence wherever it leads.
So you can't just stick to a checklist. You have to really think critically, use your experience, even your gut feeling.
Right. And sometimes you have to make tough decisions based on where the evidence points, even if it's uncomfortable or goes against what people expect.
Makes sense. But that brings up the ethics of it all, right? How do you make sure you're not just being legal, but ethical too?
Well, that's where having strong ethics is crucial. You need to really know your company's values and apply them to everything you do during the investigation. It's a constant process, always checking yourself, making sure your actions are aligned with those principles.
Right, that makes sense. Now, thinking about the different types of misconduct, it could be anything from harassment to like fraud, even policy violations. Does your approach change depending on what you're dealing with?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. While those core principles of fairness, being thorough, confidentiality, those always stay the same,
Mhm.
but how you go about things definitely depends on the situation.
I can see that.
Like, if you've got a serious allegation of financial fraud, you need a much more rigorous approach. You might need forensic accountants, lawyers, the whole 9 yards, compared to, say, someone who made an inappropriate comment in the office.
Gotcha. So it's about having the right tools for the job.
Hmm.
Speaking of tools, we talked about emails and security footage, but what other kinds of evidence are out there? This is getting me excited.
Oh, you'd be amazed. We see everything from financial records, text messages, social media posts, even physical stuff from, like, the actual scene.
Wow.
And with technology these days, we often have to dive into digital forensics, looking at computer files, internet history, even that hidden data in documents.
So you're not just a detective, you're a digital detective too.
That's a good way to put it. And trying to figure out what's actually relevant and reliable in all that data, that's the tricky part.
It must be like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Sometimes it is. But that's where experience and a good eye for detail come in. You have to be able to cut through the noise, find those key pieces of information, and then figure out if they're believable.
Makes sense. And sometimes, I bet even a tiny detail can change everything.
Oh, yeah. Sometimes it's just a little thing like a timestamp that's off or a hidden file, and boom, the whole case opens up.
Just like in the movies. Okay, so let's say you've done your investigation, made your recommendations, and now it's time to close the case. What happens next?
Well, you got to tell everyone what you found, right? Especially HR, legal, senior management, and of course, the people involved.
Yeah, it's not enough to just write it down.
Exactly. It's about making sure those findings are taken seriously and that people act on them.
So there's a lot of follow-through, even after you're done investigating.
Absolutely. If someone needs to be disciplined, you have to work with HR to make that happen. If you find bigger problems, you got to team up with the right departments to come up with solutions. It's about turning a bad situation into a chance to make things better.
So it's not just about putting out fires. It's about stopping them from starting in the first place.
You got it. And a big part of that is making sure people feel comfortable reporting problems without being scared of what'll happen to them. It's all about transparency and accountability.
Right. You mentioned before how you have to adjust this whole framework to fit different organizations. What kind of things make a difference in how an investigation is done?
Well, the size of the company, how it's structured, definitely matters. A small company where everyone knows each other is going to handle things differently than a huge company with tons of departments and layers of management.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the company's culture matters too. Some are more formal, some are more laid back.
And what about the industry itself? Like healthcare or finance, where there are so many specific rules.
Oh, yeah. The legal and regulatory stuff is huge. Some industries have super strict laws about how you do investigations. You might even need to talk to lawyers or compliance experts to make sure you're doing everything right.
So it's like juggling a bunch of balls at once. Internal policies, external rules, the specific situation, everything. What else do you have to consider?
Well, the nature of the allegations themselves is a big one. A claim of, say, financial misconduct, that's going to be handled differently than a complaint about someone's behavior.
Right.
The severity of what's being alleged and what would happen to the people involved, that shapes how we investigate.
I see. It's like a sliding scale, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
And what about the evidence? Does that make a difference in how long it takes and how complicated it gets?
For sure. If you got clear evidence, things can move pretty fast. But if the evidence is thin, or it contradicts itself, or needs to be analyzed by an expert, things can drag on.
It's like those crime shows where they find a tiny bit of DNA and suddenly the whole case changes. Those unexpected things must keep you on your toes.
Oh, definitely. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, something new pops up and you got to rethink everything. It's a constant learning process, adapting, refining your approach.
You're always learning, and it's not just about the evidence. It's about the people, too,
Yeah.
right? Their personalities, their relationships, what motivates them. How do you deal with all of that?
You hit the nail on the head. That's the human element, and honestly, it's often the hardest part.
I can imagine.
You see, everyone comes to the table with their own point of view, their own biases, their own history.
Right.
You have to be able to read people, understand what drives them, and build a connection with them. That's how you get to the truth.
Sounds like you need to be part detective, part psychologist, and really good with people all at the same time.
Yeah, that's about right. It's about being able to connect with people on a human level, hear their stories, and understand where they're coming from, even when it's different from your own view.
That's powerful. And sometimes maybe the people involved don't even realize they're doing something wrong. Like maybe they just don't understand the policy or haven't been trained properly. How do you approach that?
In those cases, it's more about teaching than anything else, helping them understand the rules, the consequences if they don't follow them, and why acting ethically matters.
Makes sense.
Sometimes, just a conversation and some training can fix the problem and stop it from happening again.
So it's not always about punishment. It's about guidance and education, too.
You got it. It's about building a culture where people are always learning, always getting better, and where mistakes are seen as chances to grow, not just reasons to punish someone.
And to do all of this, you must need a really special set of skills. You got to be analytical and detail-oriented, but also understanding and able to connect with people.
I'd say the most important skill is being able to listen without judging. To really hear what someone is saying, understand their perspective, and figure out the facts from the feelings.
Right.
It's about approaching every situation with curiosity, really wanting to know the truth, whatever that might be.
It's about being neutral, gathering all the information, and then figuring out what really happened.
Precisely. And it's not about finding someone to blame. It's about uncovering the truth, understanding the whole situation, and finding a solution that's fair and makes everyone accountable and respectful.
So it's not just about closing the case. It's about making things better for the organization and everyone in it.
That's it. And that's a goal worth fighting for.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. All these complexities of gathering evidence, figuring out conflicting stories, adapting to different situations, and how this work is always changing. What's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from this deep dive?
I think the biggest takeaway is that it's not just about the rules.
Yeah.
It's bigger than that. It's about doing the right thing,
Yeah.
protecting people, upholding what the company stands for, creating a workplace where everyone feels safe and respected.
Like you're the guardian of the company's moral compass,
Yeah.
making sure it's always pointing the right way.
I love that. And remember, every single investigation, even the small ones, they can make a difference. Not just for the people involved, but for the whole company.
Like a ripple effect, right?
Exactly. And those ripples, they can create real change, build a stronger, more ethical culture over time.
You know, after going through all of this with you, I'm feeling a lot better about facing these kinds of situations. But I'm also realizing just how much responsibility comes with it.
Yeah, it's a big responsibility, no doubt. But you're not in this alone. There are tons of resources out there to help you. Groups, online communities, even people you work with who've been through this before. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
That's good to hear. It reminds me that everyone needs help sometimes, even the pros.
And trust your gut. If something feels wrong, like there's more to the story, dig deeper.
Like that detective's intuition they always show in the movies, right?
Exactly. Sometimes that feeling is what leads you to the truth.
Okay, so as we wrap this up, what's the one thing you tell someone who's brand new to all this, someone just starting out with misconduct investigations?
I'd say go into every investigation, wanting to learn, wanting to understand the whole picture. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't assume anything. And always listen to everyone's side of the story.
Be like a neutral observer, right? Gathering all the pieces before you try to put them together.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about finding fault or pointing fingers. It's about finding the truth, understanding why things happened, and finding a solution that's fair. A solution that makes everyone accountable and promotes respect.
So it's not just about closing the case. It's about building a better future for the company and for everyone who works there.
Well said. That's what we should all be working towards.
We've covered so much in this deep dive, all the steps, the ethics, how to adapt to different situations, and how this work is always evolving.
And we talked about the human side of it all, how every case involves real people with their own experiences and vulnerabilities.
And we talked about the importance of having support, people you can turn to for help.
Yeah, and I hope we've inspired our listeners to face these challenges head on, with a sense of purpose, knowing that they can make a difference.
I think we did. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your expertise. It's been really enlightening.
My pleasure. I always enjoy these conversations, shedding some light on this important work.
And to our listeners, thanks for being here for this deep dive. We hope you've learned a lot and feel more prepared to handle these complex situations. Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and always do what's right. Until next time, keep exploring.